Hi guys, Tom Barclay here in Athens, of all places, the birthplace of Ange Postecoglou. I'm here for the Sun on England duty. England play Greece later tonight. As you can see, the Acropolis behind me. I've had a little bit of time to pop out and have a look around before the game this evening. But I just thought it was quite a fitting place, given this is where Ange was born, to do a little video about where Spurs are at, where Ange Postecoglou is at, and 5 things that I think he needs to fix to make Tottenham a serious team under him. And what I mean by that is, we all know when it's gone well, when it's working well, Tottenham under Ange Postecoglou have been thrilling, fantastic. For me, reasons to be optimistic. But every so often, or far too often I suppose, they follow up with a really sort of lacklustre performance against weak opposition, Palace and obviously Ipswich just before the international break. And it makes people, whether it be other supporters, journalists or even Spurs fans, question whether they are a serious team, whether they really can be in a position where they can challenge for anything long term, and not just be this sort of flaky, inconsistent side who on their day can be very, very good, but that day you just never know what you're going to get, and that is not the basis for success. But I was intrigued by the comments from Ange after the in the press conference after the match at Ipswich. I missed obviously the game. I was at my best mate's wedding as the best man, and the speech went pretty well. I think had a bit of my material nicked at the last minute by the groom. Probably should have shared notes with him, but thanks for the well wishes from you guys on the speech. But I missed it. But I was watching the Ipswich game. Obviously, it was pretty much of a disaster. By all accounts, but watching the press conference he did afterwards, it felt like the first time he'd really admitted that he may look to tweak his strategy. And throughout, obviously, his tenure, he's been resolute and very stubborn with his whole philosophy, and how throughout his career he's had doubters telling him to do this, do that, and he's ignored them. And this is how he's got to where he is. And I remember when talking about Vincent Kompany last season, when Burnley were going through a difficult period, he sort of advised, you stick to your principles, because once you sort of lose them, you're left kind of in no man's land. And I totally understand all that. But the comments of him saying, it's down to my approach, I'm to blame for this inconsistency, it's something I'm going to have to fix, did hint perhaps at maybe a bit of a tweak going forward, which personally I would welcome. I don't think you have to sort of throw out your whole ideology and your philosophy and everything you believe in. It's just a matter of making a few tweaks here and there. You're at a level now in the Premier League where the teams are so good, whether it be obviously the teams at the top or even teams like Ipswich. They spent decent money, they've got some really good young players. I've watched quite a lot of the likes of like Liam Delap at sort of youth level. They're not, it's obviously a terrible result and really frustrating from Spurs' point of view, but it doesn't shock me because most of the teams in the Premier League have got that quality where they can have a good day like that. And so having a few little tweaks here and there seems pretty reasonable. I mean, we've gone from Conte, a very defensive kind of manager, to Postecoglou, very, very attacking at Spurs. But it feels like maybe more of a happy medium is the way to get to genuine success if Spurs are to get there. And I think Postecoglou can do it. He just needs to have a few adaptations. I mean, first of all, just on that point, it was just words after a game. It's about action. We'll have to wait and see if he actually follows through on it, or if it was just him talking after a match and suggesting he might do something because that was his immediate reaction, or whether he really has some sort of thoughts over what he needs to do, but over actually changing tack. But it's been pointed out that Nuno got sacked after 15 points from 10 games. Ange's only 16 points. I mean, they're only 3 points off third place. Now, had they won that game, or if spots and maybes, they would be in that position now, and things would look a lot rosier. But and I don't get the sense at all that he's sort of in trouble. But 5 defeats. Let's be honest, if they keep up at that kind of ratio for the rest of the season, it's hard to see, that many losses, him keeping the job long term. But so it's down to him to sort of address it, whether it mean doubling down on his whole approach or having a few tweaks. And personally, I think a few tweaks would be welcome. And let me go into what I'm thinking about this. These 5 sort of things I think he could do to fix it. So first of all is the defensive shape. When he first came in, obviously he's got these inverted fullbacks, and it was working brilliantly with Porro and Udogie, and it caught a lot of teams by surprise. We hadn't really seen much of it in the Premier League before, and that obviously probably played a big part in this brilliant start they had. But I don't know whether it's the fact that particularly Udogie seems quite out of form this season, or teams are working them out, but it's not being as effective from an attacking point of view, and it's leaving centre-backs so exposed throughout matches, and it's a part of the reason why Spurs at the moment seem to be quite easy to play against, to play through in terms of other teams attacking them, why they're conceding so many goals. So either he finds a way of getting those individuals to perform a lot better defensively on an individual basis, and that kind of goes for the whole team really, or he tweaks it and maybe doesn't sort of go quite as gung-ho. Maybe one defender attacks throughout certain points of matches and gives a bit more protection to the centre-backs, who are right now looking pretty shaky. And I'll come on to one in particular in a minute. So I think that would be a welcome change. It doesn't have to be throughout, it's about picking your moments, but just feels that is been part of the issue this season. I mean, second one, vulnerability at set pieces. It's clear. I can already, if Andrew ever for some reason was watching this video, I could see him already sort of head down hearing that. But let's be honest, like it's an issue. Like they haven't conceded as many as they did last season. But I remember I was speaking to someone who's an Ipswich fan, and he was saying ahead of this Spurs game, they were really not a threat at all from set pieces, and yet in the game against Spurs, they just felt like they were going to create opportunities every time. Vicario's got to be stronger, he's got to improve, he's got to be more dominant, or maybe it's the organisation of the defenders, but it's an issue, and it's going to continue to be an issue, and it'll undo all the good work they can do going forward on a consistent basis. I mean, I keep banging on about it, and it's boring to keep coming back to the same theme, but you know, it is. There's a reason why we do. Like it is an issue. The third part, I mean, not to pick out on sort of certain individuals, but I think Radu Dragusin has got to do more to justify why he was brought into the club. I just feel like he's had the odd game. I thought City at home in the League Cup he was good, albeit that was a game where Spurs sort of surrendered a lot of possession. It was more about clearing the ball a lot of the time. But when it comes to the way Tottenham really want to play, I'm still yet to be completely convinced that he's a good fit for this team. Obviously, it's a hard one. He's come in basically as third choice centre back, even though Ange has talked about the fact that he doesn't want to have any sort of nailed on starters. But he is back up to Van der Ven and Romero. And look, Van der Ven might be back soon after international break, and Dragusin goes back onto the bench. But he plays enough in Europe, and he came for a good fee. You know, Bayern Munich wanted him. I think he's got a lot to do to prove that he can cut it at Spurs in the Premier League. And it doesn't help, I suppose, when Van der Ben's injured and Romero's looked iffy at times this season as well. But it feels like Ange could be getting more out of him in particular, and the same goes for a lot of other players. But I think by now it's fair for Spurs to be expecting a bit more from Dragusin when he's played. So yeah, it's maybe a bit harsh to pick on an individual, but I just feel like, I suppose some people are already talking about like how Spurs need to look at the transfer market again, but they've made most of their signings. Yeah, there's a few players they could do with bringing in maybe still, but the majority of this whole new way of doing things have already been brought in. It's about getting the best out of them now. And I would say, out of all the players that have been signed under Postecoglou, Dragusin's the one that I want to see more from. And I think that if he can do that, and he can elevate the levels of Romero and Van der Ven as a result, then that could play a big part. But again, I do feel sympathy for him too, because of the way the team is set up. He is often, as the centre back, can be exposed at times, which kind of comes into a first point. Third one, I mean, this is not a sort of particular dig at Maddison and Son. It's more that Maddison combination was so key to the start of that great start under Ange's reign, with the two of them combining beautifully and scoring lots of goals. together, and it's just both have been struggled this season, haven't they? They don't look particularly happy at times. A lack of goals. Maddison can't get in the team. Son's obviously struggled with injury. But that when Spurs were at their best last season, it felt like getting the most out of those two was a key part of it. So Ange's got to find a way of getting that back. I mean, maybe there are questions whether Son can still do that, but I think his performance against, was it West Ham, was enough evidence to suggest that he can. And Maddison, definitely, there's no reason why he should not be able to, in terms of an age perspective, get back to where he was at. But Ipswich, they were in need of goals, and he didn't come on till the 84th minute. I mean, that's quite concerning, I guess, if you're James Maddison right now. He just doesn't seem to be as trusted, even though Papsar from his performances has deserved a starting spot. But it's on Maddison to try and prove otherwise and give it, was it compelling evidence? I think that was the phrase that Postecoglou said to Tottenham and maybe England, although that feels like a long way away at the moment, that he should be in amongst it. And that is something, but it's not just on the players, it's also on the manager to try and get the best out of those two in particular. And I feel like that is a key part of them getting back to being a more consistent side, which is the whole point of this video. And the final bit is the game management side of things. And I suppose that is a bit of criticism of Postecoglou, but the stats, you can't lie when it comes to this. Sort of encompasses a few things, whether it be conceding the first goal at home regularly throughout this year, whether it be being a bit sort of weak away to physical teams, which is what Kulusevski was talking about recently, about how they need to get better at when they're away from home against physical sides like Crystal Palace. They seem to struggle, or whether it be throwing it away at Brighton in that 3-2 defeat when you're 2-0 up. Like, it's just managing the game, which kind of comes back to the first point as well, in terms of the defensive fullbacks, who goes, who stays, maybe not being quite as attacking together all the time. It's about picking your battles, and I feel like that is a big part of it. And I guess Ange's subs coming into it. I mean, Brighton was a key point where he took too long to make substitutions, and it felt like that was a part of that defeat. I would say, I think that's a fair criticism. But then there have been other games, Sarr coming on at half time for Maddison against West Ham, where it made a massive impact. So if you're going to hammer Ange on one point about subs, you've got to give it a bit of balance on the other side. So he has changed things in that way. And then there are other games where he tried to change it. Richarlison coming on against Palace, going kind of two strikers with Richarlison and Solanke, and that didn't work. So he has tried things, but it all comes into it. And the way they handle games and moments, whether it be the start of matches at home when they keep conceding goals, or that Brighton situation, it feels like they could do that better. And that for me is a key part, maybe the biggest part of this, when it comes to making Spurs a serious team, which I think they can be. They're a young side, they've got lots of exciting young players, they've got a manager who plays really attractive football, who on their day can beat anyone, and gives me confidence that they can win. I do think they can win a cup this season. They've had a bit of luck with that. They got to perform well, but the real long-term strategy for Ange, at least, is to be a proper competitor in the league, and to do that, he needs to adapt. I think in these few or tweaks. It doesn't mean change your whole thing, as I said from the off, but a few tweaks. And we'll wait and find out and see what he does. And we saw it against City, to be fair. They played much more sort of less on the front foot, more happy to surrender possession, but maybe they need to do that a bit more often in other games or in moments of games. It doesn't have to be throughout. And I feel those could be the key to getting them onto a consistent footing. But let's see.